on top. Way on top.
Test. That's better. Welcome, everyone. We'll give a chance for everybody to grab a seat. We're starting on Green Mountain College time, a little bit late. So I am delighted to be here. My opening remarks will be brief. I know that you didn't come to listen to me, but rather to learn from our invited guests. Each one is a leader in a different field, both for-profit and non-profit, and each is truly making a difference. The MAD Conference, as we refer to it internally, has become my favorite event of the year. It epitomizes the mission and spirit of Green Mountain College. Our students really do plan to change the world, and they realize it takes more than just passion. They understand it will take skill and hard work to change deeply entrenched systems. Our principal marketing message, and I can thank Karen Fleming and her team for this, of first and sustainability, goes hand in hand with making a difference and making a living. The two goals are not mutually exclusive. In fact, we believe it is not only possible but imperative that we prepare our students to become leaders and change agents. Our graduates and our guests today are testimony to the fact that it is possible. Our presenters today have been doing change work around the country and around the globe for many years. They, like all of us at GMC, are ready to welcome a new group of young entrepreneurs, teachers, for-profit and non-profit leaders who are prepared to continue the work toward a more just and sustainable society. To all in the audience, and particularly the students in the room, it is possible to make a difference and make a living. I now have the honor of introducing the Honorable David Zuckerman, Lieutenant Governor of Vermont. By the way, it's David. And by way of introduction, I'd like to tell just a short Vermont story. The member of our faculty, Karen Fleming, met the Lieutenant Governor at a recent conference, and it was clear that he was interested in learning more about GMC. Rather than send an email, immediately following my meeting with Karen, I picked up the phone and just dialed his office. I connected with voicemail, which we all get these days, but immediately, I think within hours, we got a call back from his chief of staff and said the Lieutenant Governor would be very interested in attending the conference, albeit that the legislature is in session and it might be difficult. So that took place, and the Lieutenant Governor is here with us today. So a few quick words about David Zuckerman. He is the co-founder of a NOFA certified organic farm in Heinsberg, as I discovered a few minutes ago, about 20-acre farm. Is that correct, David? First ran for office in, here's inspiration for you. First ran for office in 1994 while still a student at UVM. He lost by 59 votes, but ran again 2 years later and served for 14 years in the Vermont House. And he served for 2 terms in the Vermont Senate and was elected Lieutenant Governor in 2016. His current responsibilities are many, but a few are acting in place of the governor anytime the governor is out of state. He also presides over the Senate, and I believe just left probably the Senate a few short hours ago. And he also is charged with casting as the President pro tem of the Senate, he's charged with casting a tie-breaking vote should it be necessary. So David, we're delighted to have you here today. So please welcome Lieutenant Governor David Zuckerman.
Thank you, President Allen, and I don't know if I'm supposed to call you Bob. So I said to him earlier, just call me David, it's okay, introduce me as David. It's not that formal a scenario, although clearly dressed for it. It's very exciting to be here today. I have really devoted basically my whole adult life to activism and economic well-being, making a living as well. I was an activist at the University of Vermont on social and environmental justice issues. I had no interest in the political arena. I thought it was all corporate paid for and was sort of not interested and cynical. And I ultimately then learned about this U.S. congressman we had, an independent by the name of Bernie Sanders. You now may, of course, be familiar with him. And he inspired me because I said, wow, there's someone who is saying what he believes. He doesn't mince his words. He doesn't take any corporate money. And this is interesting. So I volunteered for him for that election. met other local folks involved and started helping other people get elected, and the next thing you know, a year and a half later, they asked me to run, which was not quite successful, but was a really amazing experience in how direct democracy really is here in Vermont, with door-to-door knocking and meeting your neighbors and listening to different perspectives and different stories, which is really something that we need more of today as we're in a sort of political atmosphere of division and tribalism, and you're either over there or you're over there, and there's no in between, when in reality, when you sit down and break bread with folks and you listen, there often is. And so in running for office, I was also working on farms, for a farm actually just a little bit north of here in Shoreham for 3 years, and then eventually started my own farm. And in terms of making a living, I felt like just farming and making a living, growing food organically, that action in and of itself was making a difference, regardless of whether I was in political office or active in the community. How I grew food and treated the earth and produced food for people was also making a difference. And it has grown to that place of 20 acres, about 1,000 meat birds, about 20 hogs, and it's still hard to make a living. And one of the brief bits of wisdom I'd love to throw out to you who are looking at a career in agriculture or sustainable agriculture or food systems in particular, and part of your making a difference thought process is you don't make a difference necessarily on day one, or you don't perceive you're making a difference on day one. It sometimes takes a long time. Some of the legislation I've worked on has taken 12, 14, and maybe even 20 years to pass. I started talking about cannabis reform in 1994, so that's 24 years ago, and we still haven't quite got there. But so making a difference happens over time. You don't always measure it by landmarks. Sometimes it's vague impressions and vague change that you make, but you're making a difference every day on civil communication and education and information for others to hear. And then suddenly a day comes and you go, wow, that changed. There's a difference in our community. We have a town park now and we didn't, or whatever the activity you're doing to make a difference is. I will also say it's important to find balance. If you aren't being fed by what you're working for, and by fed I don't just mean in food, I mean being fed by what you're working for, then you're going to run out of steam. And you need to really pick your line of activity, both in job and in passion, and hopefully the two can be together in a way that will continue to feed your soul. Because that flame has to be kept burning, or you'll be much less effective in the long run at making the difference you want to make. And I talk a lot to my daughter, who's 12, and my spouse and I both talk about wants and needs. And in the world of making a living while making a difference, it's a lot easier to make a living if you keep your wants to a reasonable level and you really know what your needs are. Because if you don't need a new phone every year, and you don't need a new pair of sneakers every year, and you don't need a new jacket every year, and you don't need the newest style of haircut 2 weeks after you just had a different style put in, then all of a sudden your ability to be financially making a living goes really well. I'll point out that probably over the last 20 years, and I'll wrap it up shortly here, the last 20 years I've probably saved a couple $1,000s on haircuts. Okay? Now, I've been told regularly, both during campaigns for statewide office and even after I got elected, when are you going to cut your hair and respect the office? And I appreciate that. I answered that question on public radio, Vermont Public Radio, and I said, well, I appreciate that's a concern for you. And, ultimately I think a lot of folks are more concerned about what we're going to do about their economic standard of living, what we're going to do about water quality in Vermont, what we're doing about health care, affordability, and so forth. And, I'm going to pretty much focus on those kinds of issues. And if the length of my hair is what makes or breaks your individual support for me, I can respect that. I hope you'll still contact me anytime you have an issue of concern that the legislature is dealing with that I can help with, or getting through the bureaucracy of state government. I'm willing to help you whether you support me politically or not, but ultimately my hair length probably isn't going to be the biggest issue that I talk about on a regular basis. But I will tell you, it has saved me thousands of dollars not going to the haircutter and hairstylist and simply having my daughter cut my hair as she did about a month ago. So needs and wants is a big part of being able to find a blend of making a difference and making a living. The last piece I'll point out with respect to how to do those two things together, and for me again in agriculture, and I'm an organic farmer, and how I treat the land and the water is part of what I feel is making a difference far outside of the suit that I'm wearing now and the role I have as Lieutenant Governor. But I'll tell you that the place out there, for those of you interested in food systems and agriculture, where there are jobs to be found, is do the grunt work for a few years, working on a farm, learning how to farm. I got paid $5.75 an hour when I started farming. Do that work with someone who knows what they're doing. Stick around for a few years, and after 3 or 4 years, if you look for your own farm, that's one way to do it. But you're going to be working 80 hours a week to get yourself off the ground and competing in a full-fledged marketplace now that's pretty saturated. Or look for a farm manager job, because there's a lot of farmers out there, my scale, 10 to 25 acres, looking for those managers or woman managers who can really take the reins, and you'll actually make more money on less hours doing that. So just a little inroad for possible jobs to be able to make a difference and make a living. So I look forward to different speakers. Thank you for having me here to speak briefly. I look forward to mingling with folks after the TED Talks as well if there's questions and you want to chat. And I'm excited for all the different distinguished guests you have today to hear their quick stories on how to make a difference and make a living. Thank you.
So that was a pretty good GMC that thing. I had a long introduction prepared for Melinda Moulton, but she's requested that I only say that she's the CEO of Main Street Landing in Burlington. So please welcome Melinda Moulton.
You're going to cut the lights for the slides, or are you all good there? Can you see it pretty good? Okay. Hi, everybody. Hi. All right. Good afternoon. My name is Melinda Moulton, and I'm the CEO of Main Street Landing. For the next 15-20 minutes, I will share with you my life story as it winds its way into a career in sustainable redevelopment. I hope to show you why leading from the heart provides a far more valuable rate of return on the bottom line than any other business practice. My story begins in Allentown, Pennsylvania, the home of Bethlehem Steel. I was born in 1958, 68 years ago. My early childhood was a happy one. My favorite TV show was Roy Rogers. Dale Evans and Roy Rogers always did the right thing, and they never lost to the bad guys in the black hats. My father, Robert, owned an H.E. Stout and Sons, which was one of the larger general contracting companies in Pennsylvania, and in my early years growing up, they were spent following my dad around his construction company, visiting the construction trailers and talking to crews. I particularly loved cutting the ribbons at the openings of his shopping centers, churches, community centers, and department stores. Tragically, my mother passed away when I was 12. She was only 40 years old, and my mother was raising 4 children as a single mother. Her death had a profound effect on me. When it came time for me to go off to college in 1967, my father told me that I would be attending Catherine Gibbs School in New York City. At the young age of 17, I found myself living in New York City in the Barbizon Hotel for Women on 63rd and Lexington Avenue. Catherine Gibbs founded the Secretarial and Two-Year Business School in 1911. Her slogan was "Get above the crowd," and her dream was that someday her school would cease to train secretaries and become a training ground for women executives. The school was located on Park Avenue in the Pan Am building on the top of 3 floors above Grand Central Station. At Gibbs, you had to dress in a suit jacket and a skirt below the knees with stockings, low dark-colored pumps, and you had to wear a hat and gloves when you went out. Our hair could never touch our shoulders, and much of our training was about professional etiquette. I remember one night, after having early evening tea at the school, leaving with a group of my friends. As we left the Pan Am building, we noticed there were not any people on the streets of New York City, but there was a policeman at every corner. One of them approached us and told us to get off the streets. When we inquired why, he told us that Martin Luther King had just been assassinated and there were riots in Harlem. As we looked down Park Avenue, we could see the orange glow from the fires of Harlem and hear the mayhem. I was just 17 years old, but I knew at that moment in time that my life would never be the same. This was the defining moment when I realized there was a social justice revolution taking place in our country, and the year was 1968. Gibbs had a terrific placement program, and I was a top student. So I got placed at Harvard working for a young professor in the Dr. James Watson Department of Microbiology. That is Dr. James Watson of Watson and Crick, the team that discovered DNA's double helix. He was one of the most important scientists of the 20th century and a Nobel Prize winner for his part in unraveling DNA. It was during this time that I began taking courses at Harvard to round out my business education. I marched with Daniel Ellsberg, who released the Pentagon Papers to the New York Times in 1971, which uncovered the fact that America's role in the Vietnam War was based on decades of lies. It was the 60s revolution, and I was captivated and in the center of the storm. This was the beginning of my activism into civil rights, equality for women, social justice, and environmentalism. It was here in Cambridge where I met my husband, Rick, who carried me off to Denver where he was finishing up his degree in film at Denver University. In 1972, we had our baby, Eli, and we moved back to Vermont to be close to Rick's family. We bought a 10-acre hayfield on top of a hillside in Huntington. We pitched a tent and began building our stone house based on the Scott and Helen Neary method of forms, concrete, and fieldstone. We had a dozen friends come up to the meadow the summer of 1974 to pitch their tents and help us build our little stone house. We obtained an FHA loan through the government for $16,000, and our monthly mortgage was 0.5%, which was $86 a month. My son was 2 years old, and with him on my back, I drove our beaten-up truck every day to Starksboro to Mr. Malin Norris's farm, where he gave me access to his fieldstone. I hauled 36 truckloads of stone with my baby on my back. As cold weather set in, our friends left, and I got a job at the University Health Center. Picture this. I would wake up and get out of our tent, sponge bathe myself and my son, drive to town, drop Eli at daycare, and go to work. When I returned at night, I would cook dinner over an open campfire, and we would crawl into our tents. It was late October when the first real snow fell. We woke up to about 4 inches of snow, and my son had an ear infection. It was cold, really, really cold. So I packed up our things and I left while my husband hollered, "Honey, don't go. I'll have a roof on by Christmas." I rented an apartment in town, and the roof was completed by Easter when we moved into the house. There was a large plastic water pipe from the basement delivering water to a masonry tub, plastic sheeting on all our window openings, no telephone, only a wood stove in the middle of the room, no interior walls or doors, or bathroom, and no second floor. But it was our home. We built it ourselves, and it was only $86 a month. When I became pregnant with my daughter, I quit my job at UHC and teamed up with my husband for the next 4 years making a film, Legends of American Skiing. This film won national acclaim and was released on PBS. It was inducted into the International Ski Hall of Fame as one of the top 10 ski films ever made. The film is about the rise of skiing in America from 1849 to 1942. We raised over $200,000 in grants and private donations, which in those days was a lot of money. So Rick and I were stay-at-home parents working on our film for 5 years and raising our 2 children. When my daughter Mariah was about to finish school in 1983, I decided to return to my career. I was 33 years old and I answered an ad for a position with a newly created development company. In December 1983, I walked into the office of the company now known as Main Street Landing on Burlington's waterfront, and there was nothing in the office except a phone on the floor. Lisa Steele, who was the owner of Main Street Landing, and I began our journey together to develop the Burlington waterfront. As women with progressive beliefs, we knew we wanted to focus on serving our community, protecting the environment, caring for the human condition, and making sure our work was financially successful. This was in the 1980s, before the word sustainability was even a word. We were considered pioneers in the green development movement, along with many other young people who migrated to Vermont to live a different kind of life from their parents. We were part of a counterculture movement that rejected the mores of mainstream American life. We moved to Vermont to make a difference, one that reflected our values, and to change the definition of work to include care, love, and focus on being good stewards and making sure we didn't compromise people or planet for profit. There were 22 attempts to develop the Burlington waterfront in the 20th century. 22 attempts. They were all by men. But it took 2 women with a vision to actually get something built. We wanted to create a mixed-use development that included housing, retail, and office all in one building. We were told by local developers that the only way to make money was to build high-end housing. We did not want to do that because we feared that this would gentrify the waterfront and exclude people. And we adopted a motto, a place for all people, and our work focused on ensuring everyone had access to utilize the buildings we created. We also focused on green building concepts and worked with folks like Bill McClay to ensure our buildings were energy efficient, healthy, built with locally sourced materials, and utilized state-of-the-art systems. We were leaders in the green building movement long before it was popular. We had developers tell us our windows could never open because of the heating and ventilating systems, and we said, of course our windows need to open, and they do, and we made it work. We defied the conventional wisdom around development, architecture, and construction, and created a whole new team approach in creating our projects. I want to talk now about how and why the work of Main Street Landing is a wonderful example of leading with heart. As women, and most of you will probably agree, we are nurturers. We put other people's needs ahead of ours, and we tend to care very deeply about the happiness of people we love. As women, we needed to build a community and build community wealth through our work creating a built environment. In our work, it is very important to be unique, to stand out from the crowd and do things in our business that other people cannot even imagine. This is a picture of our endangered species wall. And this endangered species wall is at Lakeland College in the Skinny Pancake hallway. We had this painted by Ron Hernandez because visitors to the Skinny Pancake restaurant, many of them students like you, had to walk down this long hallway to get to the bathrooms. And we decided that if we painted an endangered species wall, identifying the creatures that are going extinct, that would raise awareness. And that long walk to the bathroom would now include a moment of reflection on the state of our environment and the beautiful animals, birds, fish, and mammals that are leaving our planet because extinction is forever. We wear our beliefs on our office door just to remind folks who come to visit us that this is who we are. We adopted the Wizard of Oz theme throughout our project when we inherited the flying monkeys seen on the buildings. This sign is to remind people that our tenants bring their babies to work, and often they are sleeping. We also let our tenants bring their dogs. We have a lot of dogs at Main Street Landing. The flying monkeys have been such a great success for us. They lend a touch of magic, mystery, and myth to our buildings. Main Street Landing has focused much of its work on creating public spaces. We truly believe that the Burlington waterfront belongs to everyone, and we are just the stewards. We created over 18,000 square feet of new parkland at the Battery Park extension. We built many staircases that guide people from Battery Street down to the waterfront. We have balconies and public lobbies and benches for the public, and we were always considerate of the views of Lake Champlain, and we designed our buildings to protect the views. Our design team included local architects. We believe that if we built beautiful buildings that inspired and evoked feelings in people, that then they would want to be here. Main Street Landing's average occupancy rate is 98%. Our sustainable and environmental focus, which carried through our 36 years in business, has been the true highlight of our work. I had a person from out of town send a snapshot of this sign to one of my Facebook friends. And they said, "You will only see a sign like this in Vermont." And when I made that sign, it never dawned on me, but then it hit me and made me laugh. The ATM is located outside the endangered species wall next to the Peace and Justice store, only in Vermont. This is our philosophy. Sustainability means that decisions and choices made today should not limit the choices and opportunities of future generations. We strive to promote ecological integrity, economic security, empowerment, responsibility, and social well-being. And in return on that investment comes back to us in many ways, some more important than financial reward. We created a performing arts center in the Lakeland College building because we wanted the public to have access to our building. We have daily rental spaces, a black box theater, and a film house. Thousands of people utilize the building. They are not tenants, they are daily renters or just visitors that come to our events. Every Tuesday night we show a free classic movie. We get over 200 people, many are families from the Old North End. The folks who have the high-end condos across the street come over too, and in that moment, the homeless and those without much wealth sit next to those who do, and they laugh and they share and they connect. It is a community service that we provide in order to create cultural enrichment while fostering friendships and connections. Again, our place for all people. And every month we choose a nonprofit organization that can collect donations from the moviegoers and talk about the work that they do before the movie starts. The community piece of what we do is critical. Localism resonates loudly in all of our work. We have sponsored the Polar Express event for years. It is the premier event for the Vermont Children's Trust Foundation. We host sponsor events, and 10% of our profits are donated yearly to local nonprofits. We have devoted our careers to bringing back public transportation to Burlington, focusing on passenger rail. The Union Station was the hub of rail and trolley service in the first half of the 1900s. Since 1987, we have been working for the return of passenger rail to Burlington, and we are told this will happen by 2020. The Union Station was built in 1916, and we created the new train station in 1997 with the help of Governor Howard Dean, Senator Patrick Leahy, and others who obtained federal funding so we could build the addition to the existing Union Station. Main Street Landing led a movement to create the Cycle the City bike loop, and we helped to create historic signs along the 14-mile bike loop to help folks understand the rich history of their waterfront. One of our tenants is Local Motion, a nonprofit predicated to protecting and promoting pedestrian and bike travel in Vermont. Education is a big piece of what we do, and we often have school children come for a tour to learn about our work. These are my most treasured moments, passing on to the next generation what we have learned in our journey. A couple of years ago, I did the Hunger Free Vermont 3 Squares Challenge, where for 7 days I can only spend $36 on food. That is $5.14 a day. I was able to garner some great press about my experience, which brought awareness to hunger issues in Vermont. Today, sadly, 17% of Vermont's children go to bed hungry. Innovation is the active process of introducing new ideas, devices, or methods. I was so honored when the Lake Champlain Chamber's Leadership Champlain class chose Main Street Landing as their project. By being innovative and changing the dynamics of normal development practices, we have garnered a lot of attention over the years, and nothing is more satisfying than being asked to share what we do like I am today. We really care deeply about creating spaces for people to work, live, and play. Like Skinny Pancake, who were leaders in the local food movement, and 7 Generation, international leaders in the green, cleaning, and baby product movement. Being visionary means that you think about and are planning the future with imagination and wisdom. It means you are creative and inventive and enterprising. This was the waterfront at the turn of the century. This was the waterfront in 1978. It was a wasteland. Sharing our vision and including the community and local stakeholders allowed us to put our vision into a 250,000 square foot built environment that serves our community. Our 25-year vision was adopted by the city of Burlington in the early 1990s. We worked very hard to incorporate elegance and beauty into all of our work. This includes providing art galleries in all of our buildings. Because let's face it, art is what defines civilization. And as civilized people, it is what refreshes our souls, feeds our minds, and frees our imagination. The outcome of our work translated into receiving awards and recognition, which translated again into occupancy rates that outperformed most other buildings in Burlington. It translated to long-term tenants who chose to stay and run their businesses at Main Street Landing. The community trusted us and permitted us to do our work, and to this day, I feel tremendous love from those folks who appreciate what we have done. You cannot place a value on love. It costs nothing, and yet it is worth everything. In a week, I will be 66 years of age. It's not true. This is an old speech. In a week, I will be 68 years of age. I have a long life full of many lessons, so I took a moment to write up a few words of wisdom which I hope will help you in your life's journey. Realize that what you do not know often allows you to take chances that you would not otherwise take. I call this the power of naivete. If Lisa and I knew what we were doing and what we were in for, we never would have done what we did. Allow yourself to make things up along the way and not always know anything. You don't need to know anything to create your vision and to make it happen. Serve on boards that align with your values and work up to leadership roles. Adopt business practices that align with your personal values and beliefs. Always be true to yourself in the work that you do. Invest in your community. For every dollar an hour that you invest in your community, you will generate value that is returned to you and your community twofold. A healthy, strong community is a huge bonus for our businesses and the overall economy of our state. Learn generative thinking, ask questions to arrive at solutions, and always support team involvement in arriving at your goals. Love and kindness will take center stage in reaching success, but remember that conflict is not your enemy. And conflict can open up one's mind to new ways of thinking, but be in conflict always with good intentions. What you say and what you do will come back to you in the same way. This is the power of universal energy. Listen to the quiet people in your life. Often they are the deep thinkers who have the best ideas. In our culture as Americans, introverts can easily be drowned out by those with more outgoing personalities. It is the loud voice in the room that most often is listened to. I strongly recommend that everyone read the book Quiet by Susan Cain. It is about the power of introverts in a world that cannot stop talking. Remember that humor and lightness of being makes the journey joyful for everyone. Use your work and your career to create the kind of world that you want to live in. And in conclusion, let me leave you with this. Someday, the light will shine like the sun through my skin. And they will say, what have you done with your life? And though there are many moments I think I will remember, in the end, I will be proud to say that I was one of us. Thank you.
Karen manages the Clean Energy Program at the John Merck Fund. In addition to her work with JMF, Karen provides strategic planning, evaluation, and facilitation services to foundations and nonprofit organizations. Let's give it up for Karen Harris.
Okay. I don't have any slides. I'm going to stand in the middle of here and let you just look at me, and I'm going to hope not to even look once at this piece of paper, but I can't promise you that I'll succeed. So I am really glad to be having this conversation about this topic of making a difference and making a living, because I realized when I was preparing these comments that it's been the question of my entire career. I just had never quite thought about it that way. And the first thing I want to say about career is that it usually, for many of us, doesn't feel like a career until after you're, looking in the rear view mirror. My first reaction is like, you want me to talk about my career? Because if you're a doctor or you're a lawyer, there's kind of a clear path and some commonly accepted milestones. But if you're trying to do something like vary your values and with your job, there's no path. It feels sometimes like a series of jobs. It feels like setbacks or maybe some interesting experiences, but it doesn't seem like a body of work until after you've done a fair amount of it. And I was thinking it's somewhere in between a puzzle and a journey. And I couldn't think of a word that encompass both. But I'll tell you what it is I want to do in this conversation with you today. 3 things. I'm going to tell you very briefly what I do now. I'm going to take you on a whirlwind tour of the journey that I did go on, and I'm going to tell you a few of what I think of as the puzzle pieces that I picked up along the way. But I want to make sure that I don't actually lose the message and all of the words in the story, so I'm actually going to tell you the 5.5 points that I really want to leave you with as part of my story. The first is, think about, when you're starting your career, I would encourage you to think about the values and the things you really do care about. And it seems to me, understanding what I know about Green Mountain College so far, you've already done that just by picking the place where you're getting your education. The second one, though, is think about where you want to have leverage. It's really interesting to listen to you, Melinda, because that's not a career that I would have even thought about when I started college. And now I actually want that career after you've given that talk. But there's corporate work, there is community organizing, there's state policy, there's just so many different ways to enter into and do this work that it's worth kind of thinking where you want to have leverage. Third is think a lot about the skills that you are going to need in order to be a useful player. And collect those skills and keep on learning throughout your whole career. Just make up your mind you're going to be learning the whole time. Am I on 4? 4 is remember to think about the balance with your life. There are going to be times you're going to make choices that are more about your personal life than they are about your career. And the 5th one is cultivate relationships with your colleagues. If you look around, these are your colleagues, the first set of colleagues. And they will serve you, and you will serve them. And I would have to say it's probably one of the best parts of having a career is to have colleagues that you learn from and work with. And here's my half point, which is don't underestimate the power of serendipity. I would suggest that it's serendipity with a certain dollop of intention, because if you have thought about your values and you've thought about where you want to have leverage and you know what kind of skills you're trying to pick up, it's a whole lot easier to understand an opportunity when it comes knocking. It's not quite as random or serendipitous as you might see. So, the journey, the whirlwind. I'm going to also start from when I was born. I should have brought a picture of myself as a little kid. I didn't start in Vermont. I grew up in Los Angeles, and my dad was an American and a businessman, and my mom was from Czechoslovakia, and she was a Holocaust survivor. And she came here when she was 18 years old. She finished her high school degree. She married my dad, she raised 3 kids, and during that whole time she went to college. She started college when I was 5, and she got a master's degree when I was 13. The other thing was that LA at that time was a boomtown. We lived in a house that stood on the edge of 40 miles of sage country and lemon groves. There was, as people used to say, there's nothing out there. And by the time I graduated from college, that was 40 miles of housing developments, not a single open space anywhere between where I lived and the Central Valley. It was also a very polluted place. The air quality was so bad that a lot of times we were not able to go outside. But in the 70s, when the Clean Air Act was signed, that was the beginning of a pretty, I think, impressive cleanup of the air in Los Angeles, so that by the 90s, it was a bigger city, but it was a less polluted city. And I'm telling you those particular points because there were 3 takeaways from my childhood, I think, that helped inform what I wanted to do in my professional life. One was having a parent who had been through something that she'd been through like that. I just vowed that whatever I did in my life, I had to try and make the world a better place. I had no idea what the better thing would be, but that it had to be a guiding star for me in any choice that I made. The second was that learning is a lifelong pursuit, and that I needed to be prepared to just keep doing that always. And the third is that I'm watching my town get ruined and gobbled up by development and engulfed in smog. I became an environmentalist right then and there. And I was, 17 years old. I was an environmentalist. And watching it get cleaned up, it sort of set me up a little bit to believe that good public policy really makes a difference. And I've been committed to that idea ever since. Then I went to college. I went to UC Berkeley. I didn't start there, but I ended up there. I had 5 majors in 5 years, much to my parents' utter dismay. And I started as a drama major, and I ended up finding a degree in environmental policy. And I specialized in energy and land conservation. And then I moved to DC. As part of my degree, I worked for a few energy organizations. And this was during the Reagan years. So it's the mid-'80s, and the Reagan administration is working very hard to dismantle every renewable energy policy that has been developed and put into place by the previous administration. I don't know, that might sound vaguely familiar to you right now. And our job was to try and defend those policies. And I don't think we were all too terribly successful in a lot of cases, because a lot of those policies just hadn't been around long enough. They had not been embedded enough into the economy and into society to hold on. And that ended up being one of the other lessons that I learned right then, which is that policy matters, but sticking around long enough and embedding it into society and into culture and into the economy is what really matters. You can't, you started your talk by saying it took so many years even to get certain policies. Then you got to keep them. And that is equally important work. I graduated from college, I had student debt, I needed to get a job, and I needed to pay back my student loans. And I had a bunch of different jobs, all in DC. I worked for Bank Card Holders of America, which was a consumer credit card group, definitely not my passion. I worked for, I was an energy analyst for a consulting firm that worked for the Department of Energy, where I learned to be, I guess it was a good way to become cynical about government, I would say that. I was an organizer for Physicians for Social Responsibility, which was a nuclear disarmament group. And all those groups, none of those jobs were like my dream job, I will say. They paid the bills, and I learned something. I got some experience from every single one of those jobs that I'm grateful for. And the takeaway from that whole period of time, though, for me was, I came to believe, and I still do believe this, that we really need a cadre of professionals that work on social issues, that work on consumer issues and peace issues and environmental issues. And that it's important to be passionate, but we also need people who are going to see it as their careers and stick with it. And there's commitment there, there's patience there, and there's a paycheck there. Because I was watching the people on the other side of these debates, and they get paid to move an agenda. And if we don't have the same kind of professional mentality, we're just not going to be able to compete. But I've been thinking about this in the context recently of the movements that have been popping up right now. Black Lives Matter, Indivisible, the gun debate. And I'm just wowed by the passion of the people who are rising up and this moment and of momentum and movement that I think professionals, that's not what professionals do. They can't create that kind of a groundswell at all. But I'm hoping that professionals can help those movements be as effective as possible. So I'm sort of watching this little moment with a fair amount of hope, actually, in spite of everything. Let's see. So I lived in DC, and then serendipity started to happen. I decided I wanted to move back to California. I found a job. Like literally, somebody sent me a job description, and didn't say who it was. It was for a program officer at a foundation called the Plowshares Fund, which worked on disarmament issues, and that was the beginning of my life working on philanthropy. I ended up becoming the executive director after about 4 years, and I did that for a while. And then I ended up moving over to what I thought of at the time as my dream job, which was working in the conservation program at the Packard Foundation. This was, as in David Packard, he had recently died and left $8 billion to his family foundation, and this had, as a result, become the biggest environmental foundation in the country. And so that was exciting, I will say, and gratifying. But the personal part of my life started to come into play a little bit more forcefully. During those years I got married, I had kids, and we were living in San Francisco during the first tech .com boom, and it had become outrageously expensive to live there. And the simple things that my husband and I wanted for our kids were impossible things. We wanted a decent public school, and we wanted to live in something other than a 2-bedroom flat at some point in our lives. And we wanted access to the outdoors. And most of all for me, I just wanted time with my kids. I just wanted slow time with my kids. And those things were impossible. And my New England-born husband, sensing an opening, because I was committed to San Francisco forever, and he suggested, let's try living in Vermont for a year and see what it's like. And I agreed, and 20 years later, here we are. But in that move, I realized I had to reinvent myself professionally. I still wanted to work on policy. I still wanted to work on it at a national or at least a state and regional level. And I needed to make money to support the family. My husband was a freelance writer, so we both definitely needed to work. And I started taking jobs that my colleagues, as I said, they pay attention, you work with your colleagues. Colleagues of mine were throwing me consulting jobs, and I thought, well, I'll do this until I find my real job, and I'll do that until I find my real job. And 2 years later, I came to the realization that I was not going to find my real job living where I live in Vermont, and we weren't going to be leaving Vermont anytime soon. And the other thing I realized, though, is that I had a business, that I had not been thinking about it as a business at all, but that's what it was. And so once I made that shift in my own thinking, I started to also be able to think about how to grow that business and how to make that business more viable. And the first thing I realized was that foundations, in particular nonprofits as well, they cared about evaluation. So I started learning about how to do evaluation. And then the next thing that I realized is that those evaluations weren't really all that effective unless they were being used to do planning for the future. What's the point of looking back if you're not going to use it to look ahead? And so I started learning how to do strategic planning. And the last thing I realized is that I was going to a lot of really poorly run meetings. And so I decided to learn how to be a facilitator so that I didn't have to endure really poorly run meetings unless it was me doing the poor running. And I'm realizing I did not tell you what I do, right? Did I skip that part of my talk? Yes? Okay. So now I'm going to tell you that part. So I have a consulting business. I call it a business. I work with foundations. I help foundations design grant-making programs. I help manage them, and I do that now currently, I'll say in a minute. And I also do evaluation of grant-making programs. I work directly with nonprofit organizations on strategic planning, and I facilitate within conversations within organizations and across organizations to design campaigns and programs. I continue to be a policy person. I have been a generalist for part of my career, but I consider myself an environmentalist first and foremost, and most of the work I've done is on energy and land use. And I currently manage the Clean Energy Grant-Making Program for a foundation in Boston called the John Merck Fund, where we support groups that work on climate and clean energy policy at the state level and at the regional level. And I recently did another project for the Energy Foundation in California, helping them design a Northeast electric transportation strategy. So still fun to think about all those issues. I am about to embark on the next phase of my, I think, professional journey. I'm starting to see the foundation I work for is actually spending out in 4 more years. We're part of a 10-year spend out, so I get to think about what my next stage is going to be. And I've started seeing this professional coach where I'm getting to talk about what my values are and what skills I have and what experiences I have and how am I going to use those to think about this next venture in my life. So I'm going to close with just back up to some of the advice I gave before, but with a little bit of a change. I would leave you with a few things. One, again, think about your values and keep revisiting them as time goes on. Number 2, think about leverage and where you want to be. And that may change over time. I think it'd be really interesting career if it does change over time. Number 3, keep on learning. Don't ever stop trying to learn. Number 4, and this is more for you than for me, there's a point in a career where I think you just take jobs because you're going to learn something. And you take them and you think about what you're going to learn about that, and you're going to collect those experiences along the way. I thought it was interesting when you said if you want to go into agriculture, you should really work on a farm. That not all these jobs are going to be perfect, but they're going to be useful. And another point is there may come a time when you can't, that real job you want isn't going to materialize. You're going to have to create it yourself. And then the last one is back to remembering your colleagues. Cultivate those relationships, take that part of your professional life seriously, and I promise you will not be sorry. So I want to wish you good luck on your journey, and I hope that you remember to enjoy the ride.
Thank you, Karen. I'd like to now introduce Daryl Young. Daryl Young is the Director of Sustainable Cities at the Summit Foundation in Washington, D.C. Welcome, Daryl.
always had trouble understanding what I do for a living. These are both college-educated individuals that still don't understand what I do for a living. When I worked for the Sierra Club, they thought I handed out pamphlets in a mall and went door to door soliciting donations. It's not a bad thing, but they were very afraid. When I went to work for the Department of Conservation, a $1.2 billion agency, and led their organization, my parents' largest question was, does the job have benefits? And most recently, as director of the Sustainable Cities program at the Summit Foundation, when I told them I had gotten this job, they said, oh, is it like Ed McMahon? You go to people's houses and hand out large checks. Is there a ceremony? And these are college-educated people. They thought that I just handed out cash. They were telling their neighbors, hey, Daryl gives away cash. And I don't do that. And how I got to where I am now is what I'd like to talk to you about. You know, when people say, do you have a plan? Was there a plan? There never really has been a plan. It's been more of an evolution. If anyone says you have a plan, what you learn very quickly is the plan becomes stale. It's like people who say, well, we need a 5-year business plan. 5-year business plans are so last century. Today, do you have a 2-year business plan? Do you have a 1-year plan? Given how everything is changing so quickly. So, let's talk about learning to walk and talk. So where did I start after college? After college, I got a job organizing communities to register to vote in some of the most interesting places. In the middle of the Central Valley and in the desert in 122-degree weather. It's very hard to talk to people when they're running from their car into the store in Spanish, and I don't speak Spanish. But what I learned is you can organize people in the community who see a better way by being involved in electoral politics. And I learned that from very little, you know, I was given a bag of dimes and said, go organize this community. The generosity of people, which is a through line throughout all I've done, is something that's palpable, and you can pick that up. The goodwill of people, if your intention is to do good work, and they see you as being genuine and authentic, you can make a real difference. And that's what I learned. After that job, I got a job here, working in the legislature. They had seen the work that I had done and said, would you like to come work in the legislature? So I worked for a guy by the name of Sam Farr, and he represents the Central Coast. And I learned a lot about how does the sausage get made. Now, sure, I learned about it in college, but what's in college is not what's real. I learned about how to build coalitions. I learned about how do lobbyists work. Where does the money, and there are ceremonies, where does the money come from and go to? For example, in this building, you cannot give someone a contribution, but you can walk outside and give them a contribution that's legal. I learned a lot about how money in politics works. I would say that maybe jaundiced in the view of politics, but it made me very skeptical about the motivations of people. But I also learned a lot of things that I wasn't trained for. One of the things I helped do was pass, at the time, the nation's toughest organic food law, the California Organic Food Act. I learned, just on the cusp, when organics were becoming popular, that we could work with agriculture. We could work with farmers. We could work with a whole set of different diverse groups of people. I also learned about puppy mills and pet store dogs. And we went after the pet store industry. And what you learn is you may think you made no impact, but 30 years later, just this last year, California passed a law that said you can't sell pets in pet stores unless they come from a shelter. So if you think you didn't make a difference, you start a ball rolling. You may not be there to see the ball, but later when the ball arrives, you say, I had a role in that. And that's very personally satisfying. I left to go work for the Sierra Club, where I was a lobbyist for the Sierra Club, and then I was promoted to be the national media director in charge of communications for the Sierra Club. We worked on NAFTA. We were the only environmental group nationally that opposed NAFTA. So that's me. Thank the bureaucracy that is the Sierra Club who decided they wanted to go do that. You know, NRDC, all the other friends, not there. They said, oh, NAFTA will cover the environment. It'll trade it. It'll take care of the environment. Didn't happen. But we learned a lot about communicating to our grassroots to try to make a difference. Did we win? No. But we knew we were right. And the benefits, if putting a marker down and saying, down the line, you're right, things tend to come back. Your predictions often will come true. So, after the Sierra Club, I was approached by a guy, I think maybe he'd be here. Dwayne, are you here?
Not today.
Not yet.
No, you couldn't make it.
He couldn't make it. Dwayne Peterson, who's with Sun Common. called me one day and said, do you want to come back to the legislature? Do you want to go work for the Senate Natural Resources Committee? We're taking over. And he said, I said, what are we going to do? He says, in typical Dwayne dramatic fashion, we're going to kick in doors and take names. And I said, this is a legislative job. Yes, but the chair was a guy by the name of Tom Hayden, 60s activist Tom Hayden. And what I learned was that Tom was not the kind of guy who was going to come in, kick in doors and take names. He knew how to create a compelling narrative. He worked with some of the most conservative legislators in the state Senate, ones who voted to have him out because they saw him as being a traitor, and got legislation passed, got investigations passed, got investigations launched. I learned so much about investigative journalism. I learned how to ask the hard questions and build a comparative narrative so the average person can understand that. And it's because of Dwayne, because of Tom, I learned so much. Tom at the same time said, someone desperately needs to go and work for Gray Davis. This is a very pale, very white-haired gentleman who didn't necessarily have a good understanding of the environmental community and the upsides and downsides of how you say something. Language is very important. So he said, please take a leave of absence, go work for them, help them. They desperately need it, so you can help advise him on how to have a campaign which is culturally relevant and socially relevant to the widest number of people. I did that, and then I had this weird position of being both working for the governor and being the chief consultant to the Senate Natural Resources Committee for Tom. And it took me to weird places. Like, for example, who wears a suit and goes to the pyramids? The governor of California does. But I learned a lot about working with other people in other places. I learned about doing the advanced work, calls the advanced work, to understand the complications of how you relate with other individuals. That was one of a really good lesson. And because of that, the governor one day said, what do you want to do? You can't do both of these jobs forever. And his staff said, yeah, what do you want to do? I said, I do not want to be close to the sun. In this case, the governor is the sun. I want to be in the outer rings of the planet system. I want to have my own planet. And I want to run the Department of Conservation. And most people said, they don't even know what that is. Well, it's a $1.2 billion agency that does mining, regulates mining. It doesn't regulate, it studies, it does seismic safety. It has the nation's largest curbside and bottle and can recycling system. It does farmland preservation, and it does so many other things. As people said, it's the department of everything interesting. And I had a wise person who said to me, two things before you start. A, you've never run an agency that's $1.2 billion, and you've never managed 1,200 people with 13 offices statewide. These people know more than you. You need to let them know that you care about their advancement and their promotion of their careers, and that will serve you well. Also, you need to have a sense of humor. And humor has been a through line through everything that I did. So when we had an annual meeting with all 1,200 people in a meeting room just like this, I told people we had spent about $1.3 million on a new logo and branding campaign. And I started out with real slogans like better decisions through sound science. And then finally I came up with our slogan really is going to be putting the con in conservation. And everyone started laughing. What it created though was a common line, a common sense of who we are, because this is an agency that does a lot of different things. Creating a sense of humor, having a sense of humor, and having a common shared language, shared experience, even though you do different things, I learned, helps build a sense of community within an agency. So that's the building we were in. We called it the Darth Vader building. It's an ugly, environmentally not responsible building. We tried the best to do what we did. But it was weird going from a small office to the top of the building. And we used to do things like look at other offices, like the state agency secretary, I'd call her up and say, hey, nice suit. But what you know is that if you have a sense of humor about this, people begin to trust you inherently. Because you're not making fun of them, you're having fun with them. I got to do weird things like be on TV. My parents, for the longest time, thought I was a seismologist, if you talk about earthquakes, because the seismologists could not save their lives. They could not save anyone's life, let alone their own lives, talking about earthquakes. So we said, let's get out in front of the media more. Let's talk about earthquakes. So we got out in front of the media and talked about earthquakes. We talked about farmland preservation. We took people to places and showed them what was the loss of farmland looking like in California. We even took legislators. Here's another thing. If you have a bunch of people you work with or you're working for that you need to influence, take them somewhere. I had someone tell me once, the best way to ensure your budget exists is to take legislators and their staffs places that only you have access to. Well, the California Department of Conservation instruments all major bridges in the state of California, and regularly service the Golden Gate Bridge. So I said, how would you like to go, Governor, or not Governor, Senator, how would you like to go to the top of Golden Gate Bridge and look at our instruments? Because they're going to be cut. And they go, oh, okay. And we take them up, and next thing you know, every year our budget got reinstated in certain ways. So, good lesson, have fun, learn things, but there's nothing like a shared experience when you're with a senator who's a little portly in a very tiny elevator, you get very close, and you break down those bonds, right? And because I worked in the legislature, they kind of knew. Fun. So, you heard me talk about fun before. Fun is important. One of the things I always did was, when people did good work, I could give them a certificate, I sent them a canned ham. And as a result, to this day, I get people calling me from the department saying, where's my canned ham? Right? Now, is it weird? Yeah. Is it ethical? Canned ham's not really healthy for you. But it's odd. Because a state agency director of 1,200 people sending canned hams to people is not an idea that people really think. What's that about? But it's another way of building a sense of camaraderie and having fun. Every year at Halloween, the executive team dressed up. This year we happened to be a flight crew. We went out through all 28 floors of the building, had a cart, handed out candy. It was fun. So from that job, I took a detour for 3 years, working in the fabulous world of advertising. It is in some ways like Mad Men. Because I had background in communications, I was in charge of a national firm's practice in public relations. So I learned all about spam. I learned all about Culligan water. It was like Mad Men. But I learned a lot about how to work with different types of people. I wanted to learn how does the corporate world think and act. And to the extent that we can do things for them, help them act ethically, that was an important thing for me. So I went and did that. Then I got recruited one day to take a job at the Summit Foundation. I got a call from a friend, a contact, who said, the Sand family is interested in hiring you. We're not really recruiting, so would you talk to them? I said, okay, sure, I'll go talk to them. And I had some interviews. They were very, very nice people. The person who hired me said, this is a family foundation. This is the most functional family you'll ever meet. They're all really smart, and they want you to have freedom. And what I learned from this job is two things. The level of contacts that I had over the years helped me in this job. And that freedom is sometimes better than having thousands of people working with you or a huge salary. Freedom to go explore, to learn is great. The program was called Innovations in Sustainable Design Program. I said to them, what is that? What do you think that means? They go, we want you to figure that out. And I'm used to saying, okay, great, I'm a recovery bureaucrat, I'll do something in 90 days max. They go, no, take a year and a half to figure that out. Talk to everyone you want. And so we seized on the notion 10 years ago on sustainable cities, because no one was really working on that per se. And someone from the Brookings Institution told me, welcome to DC, but DC is where dreams go to die. Took that advice and decided we are going to focus in on working with bureaucrats, because I'm a recovering bureaucrat. I know that there are a set of freaks of nature out there that actually can get some work done. So one of the things they said that they didn't have, was a framework. And this is something that the SANS are very interested in, is how do we anchor our work in a larger scheme of how does the world connect? And at the time, mayors were getting all kinds of rankings. Oh, we're the #1 city for sustainability. And these were always black boxes, not designed by people who knew what they were doing necessarily. So these sustainability directors got together and said, right, we're going to have our own system. It's going to be interrelated. It's going to be interconnected. It's going to be intersectional. They didn't have that word back then, but they said it's going to be connected. These are the goal areas. These are each of the areas that the Star Community Rating System works on. It's a dashboard of how is your city doing. And what was amazing about this was that we weren't going to fund every single box here. But I bet you could probably find your interest somewhere in this box. And we knew other foundations that might be interested in diversity, or indoor air quality, or human services, or education, or food. So the idea was, right, we're tiny as a foundation, you're big as a foundation. Here's how your work fits into a larger framework. So let me just take climate and energy. These are all the areas of climate and energy. This is a chart. It's not a cartoon. It's a chart of every single connected goal area we showed you with their sub-goals, with their objectives. And if you look at this, everything is eventually connected. So if you take the way you think about things and say, right, I'm going to work on sustainable ag, But I know sustainable ag is tied to equity. I know sustainable ag is also tied to energy and climate. All these things again relate. So you don't have to stress out that you're not single-handedly changing the world by just working on sustainable ag. You're playing a role in a larger piece of things. And it's helped us measure what our cities doing. There are over 100 cities that are now using this framework. They report every 3 years on how they're doing. So we have a data-driven model, if you will, that tells us what are the cities that are across North America doing. This is not yet public. They're going to announce it, but the U.S. Green Building Council is now going to take over this program, and they intend to launch this internationally for cities across the world as a dashboard for how our cities doing, how are they performing. These are the people who built it. It's I call them freaks of nature. They're kind of like the Fight Club. They don't talk about themselves. They have horribly bad graphics. We try to get them to improve this, but they can't. They don't know how. And it's 150 cities across North America, now actually 175. These are core members. Every core member is allowed to sponsor a set of people on their staff. You don't get to join this group unless you commit to participate. And they monitor you. And if you don't participate in 75% of the activities on a yearly basis, they ask you to leave because there's a waiting list of people. Here is the geographic distribution across the United States of all the different players. They've grown to the point now where they have a $4 million annual budget, which goes specifically for them to innovate together. First they learn from each other, now they're innovating. And it's great for me to say, right, here's my contribution, you guys go spend that money. And I get to listen to what they're learning. They're my ultimate focus group. What's the lesson here? Networks, set of people. So now if someone says, what do you know about Indianapolis? I know the sustainability director of Indianapolis. I can get their viewpoint of how does something look like. Over time, here's how connected they become. And because some of the leading cities, I call them Navy SEALs of sustainability, urban sustainability, were tired of just saying, well, we should go plastic bag bags, or we should do more bicycles. They wanted a more ambitious effort. They wanted to work with the leading cities across the world. We helped to start the Carbon Neutral Cities Alliance. That alliance is made up of roughly 20, soon to be 24 cities that have a permanent political and economic commitment to reduce their carbon footprint by 80% by 2050. It's a nice thing to say. How you get there is hard. Each of these cities like Vancouver, Copenhagen, Boston, have said, we're not quite sure how we get there. Our mayor said we're going to do it. The city council says we're going to do it, but we don't know how to get there. We have a framework that we help to support. We're going to try to fill that framework out. So where are the areas that we're starting to see there's need? We're getting a hand on transportation. We're getting a hand on buildings, but we're not getting a hand on transportation. That's the next big thing. Here are the cities involved. And Mary talked about fun. These people are sometimes some of the most boring. This is big screen. Some of these people are the most boring people in life. So what we try to do is make them look glamorous. Here we are last year in Sydney, because that's one of the cities. And you'll see that one of the things I do is, in my free time, is I make fake record album covers. So the thing is, I say, look mad like your budget just got cut. And that's what we get. And what we've also done is gone to other institutions, and we fund them to serve the needs of the city sustainability directors. I also work with the Funders Network. I'm on their board. It's 150 cities, 150 foundations, both national and place-based. Try to learn about what they need, what they're working on, and I'm on their board, and I learn about how do we further do those connections. Here's our record album cover. This is a Nike missile base pointed at Cuba. Okay, some of you people are boring. A lot of funders are boring. Karen's not boring. She's not boring, so travel with Karen. Karen's not boring, but a lot of funders are boring. This gentleman works for the MacArthur Foundation, and he is the funnest guy I know. But in his normal day, you saw him, you would not see this. We took this when we were in Copenhagen studying district energy change. Here's a meeting of more funders. These are national funders looking badass. Right? And this is when we went to go visit Prince's house. We always do these things. We get there early on our own dime. We go see something cool. This is an obligatory photo that a friend of ours that I had to put in. She took this photo of me. And lastly, we're back to my mom. My dad's gone now. My mom still doesn't quite understand what I do for a living. But she does understand this. She goes, the bike lanes in my town, in Sunnyvale, yeah, because in San Jose, they're going on those. And now I have to sort my recycling. Are you doing that? I go, no, I'm not doing that, but I'm helping support some of that. So what I know is a kind of success is that my mom starts to see certain things, and she asks me in a way that I never quite am sure, is she blaming me or complimenting me? And that to me is, you know, when you're doing good and you have a life. Thank you.
Auden Schindler, who is our keynote speaker, and Auden is the Vice President of Sustainability at Aspen Snowmass. Let's give it up for Auden.
Okay, watch this video. Can you see that? It's sideways, but that's my son Elias. Does it work? Okay, that's all right. Never mind. That's fine. I'll start with this slide. And how do I move it? Oh, with this thing. So Elias collects gnomes. I'm going to show you that. There they are. Some of you may collect gnomes. It's Vermont, after all. And that's really all he does. He's not an overachiever. He just started collecting gnomes. And someone who writes for Parade magazine found out about his gnome collection and said, hey, could we do an article on, we're doing a piece on people who collect weird things. And he was covered in a journal that basically it's in every American newspaper and reaches about 15 million people. So he became world famous for basically doing nothing but amassing junk. His sister, Willa, is an actual achiever of things. She's a badass. She's at 11 was a black belt in Subak-do. Here she is with the founder's son. Who does she hang out with when she's in D.C.? Gina McCarthy, the head of the NPA. What musical instrument does she play? Well, the most badass instrument of all, the saxophone. Elias, meanwhile, can't even get a shot at the doctor's office without complaining, and basically just loafs around. That shirt says, "Oh no, you didn't." And Elias took a test, one of those tests that says what you might have aptitude at. And very close to the top, not the top, was airline cargo baggage handling supervisor. So why am I telling you this story? I'm telling you this story because you could all tell a story like this about your family, about what you care about your children, about the fun interactions you have with your friend. And Elias and Willa, the story of them and our life together is what Aristotle called human flourishing. This is his word. And I'm here tonight to talk about why do we care about climate change and what can you do at scale that matters versus the small things that you should do anyway, but that don't matter as much. Elias is going to be what he calls an old little man in this landscape in Colorado at the end of the century. This is a NOAA chart of soil moisture content in the U.S. based on current modeling, which has been entirely accurate up to this day. And the darkest color is the same moisture content as the Dust Bowl. So, and look at South America, south of the border in Mexico. There's no water at all there. So this is going to be a migration issue. It's going to be an agriculture and food security issue. So the question I have tonight is, how do you respond to this in a way that's meaningful? Because it's a huge scale problem. And the small things we do aren't enough to solve it. I've almost stopped talking about climate science because it's so well established, but this map is really useful. You can get this from the NASA site. The darker the red, the warmer the temperature it compared to a 100-year average. Well, look at this was just one particular month, and every month now looks like this, but look at the warming in the northern latitudes. The scale here is Celsius. So the warming in this January 2016 was almost 25 degrees warmer than average. And this, as you recall, happened this winter as well. So you've got a new planet, basically. And you say, it sucks up there. It's really cold. It's good that it's warming. But that's where all the positive feedback loops are. Methane, a very potent greenhouse gas, is melting out from these bogs. And the northern forests are dying and releasing carbon. So it's a terrifying thing. And what's become interesting about the climate movement is that in the old days, 30 years ago, the people who were wringing their hands about climate were the hippies, smelled like patchouli, shaved body hair, wore beads and sandals. The world's ending, we have a crisis. But who's saying that now are, Daryl, to your boring people point, the most boring people on the planet. PricewaterhouseCoopers, I hope none of you end up working there. It's an accounting firm. It's so boring. And yet they said, hey, you know what? We're going to blow past 2 degrees Celsius warming, which was the baseline between adaptable change and catastrophe. We're headed for 4. Who else said that? The International Energy Agency and the World Bank. These are not crazy radicals. Kevin Anderson, one of the greater climatologists in the world, he said 4 degrees Celsius warming, and he's done all his studies on this, is, quote, inconsistent with a global organized community. That's science speak. What does it mean? This is what it means. So when we talk about climate, we often talk about it in catastrophic terms, in terms of economics, in terms of flooding. How do we deal with this? But that's not something you can adapt to. So if you're interested in adaptation, you have to think of it, okay, we're going to do that. The market and communities have to adapt. But you have to think of it as a way to understand mitigation, which is actually solving the problem. There's no adaptation to that, as you all here saw during Irene. But part of my message is, if you think about what society that isn't organized and has such drought and food insecurity and wars as a result of warming, what that looks like, it's a survival society where all the things we care about, all the things that make us human, go away. So it's not so much that we have to worry about this, it's that we don't get things like this. I don't know if you're baseball fans, but Nolan Arenado, the great, maybe greatest third baseman for the Rockies, he can fly. Emilio Harris, Miles Davis, these are things that societies, these are people that evolve in societies that have the time to relax and the money to support arts and culture and the things that progress us as people. Even the wilderness is in jeopardy because it will dry out too. Great art, the greatest of all. Look at his eyes. I'm going to talk about him later. Mary Oliver, the poet. Or just the back of a brook trout. This is what we care about. This is Elias fishing. Never mind the rod. It's cheap. It's a car's rod. But look at him. The cant of his knees, double jointedness, the shoes that light up when you walk. This is the epitome of childhood, of parenthood, of everything we care about as people. We care about being able to take care of our children, and in a perfect world, we'd like to treat our neighbors well. That's the golden rule, and it's consistent among all thought systems. So this is what we're trying to protect, and how do you do it in a meaningful way? This is the fundamental question I'm asking. What do we have to do if we want to realize a future that isn't a climate change world? And so you look at this, and corporations look at this, and great corporations, my work is in corporate sustainability, they say, climate change is real, it's a problem, we have to solve it. Here's how they go about it. Change your light bulbs. That's not going to solve the problem. Now let's look at a great company, Apple. Here's what Apple has done. Knowing climate change is a global problem that requires a global response, here's what they're doing about it. Reduce the carbon footprint. Does reducing the carbon footprint of one corporation matter in a global battle? No. Greenest corporate headquarters. Awesome. You should do that. But it doesn't matter. Changing suppliers. In fact, yesterday, Apple announced that it went to 100% renewable energy and 19 suppliers also. That's awesome, and it's not enough. Lowering carbon emissions, not enough. Power facilities, they did that, great, but it's not enough. Here's what you have to deal with. Apple might be one of those buildings in the world. And the problem is of such scale that Apple has to think differently. Changing your light bulbs, this is this is the most random thing you could conceive of. I found this melon labeled miscellaneous, and I use it as a way to talk about, it doesn't, you might as well do anything versus in terms of what Apple's doing. Tim Cook, here's the conversation. Mr. Cook, you realize climate is a global problem? Yes. It will take global solutions? Yes. So what are you doing to solve it? We're greening our corporation. Will that solve the climate problem? No. And that's what every corporation, every Fortune 500 corporation is doing, and they're missing the point. The action that we have to take on climate is going to be hard, challenging, difficult, and painful, but incredibly worthwhile. I love this picture of Edison. He looks so grumpy. He'd been working on the phonograph for 72 hours. And he said, opportunities missed by most people because it was dressed in overalls and looks like hard work. So what should Tim Cook be doing? What should you be doing? This is the kind of thing you need to be doing. This is Elizabeth Eckford in 1958 in Arkansas, Little Rock, integrating a school. Look at Hazel Bryan back there. Have you ever had anyone that mad at you? If you haven't, you're probably not doing enough. Climate is going to require a social movement, just like the change we drove on issues like labor and civil rights and gay marriage. It needs a movement. And so it's going to be painful. The Vietnam War protests were violent and rough. I'm not advocating violence, but I'm saying we haven't really done much. In the Montgomery bus boycott, people wore out their shoes. In the climate movement, we really haven't got a lot of examples of people who wore out a pair of shoes. But when you use voice and influence and sit down and say, where's my power? This school recognized that its curriculum was how it could be most influential, and it's leveraging that. That's right. But if you go to most colleges, they're changing the light bulbs. Not enough. This is the greatest climatologist in the history of the world, Jim Hansen, and he's getting arrested. This guy does not want to get arrested. He's an Iowa farm boy, one of the most boring people you'll ever meet. And the last thing he wants to do is get thrown in a DC prison. But look at his face. He looks happy, right? He's almost winking at the camera. These are two of the top extreme skiers in the world. Angel Collinson and Carolyn Gleick. Every one of those people in yellow shirts works for the coal industry. This is a Salt Lake City public hearing where they were saying, hey, coal guys, there are 2 coal plants right out of Salt Lake City. Would you just obey the law? Just meet EPA standards for clean air. It was just clean air. And that's all they were asking. But you know how rough, how difficult it is to do that? But also look at them, they're having a good time. I'm going to skip that. What we need at the corporate level is for CEOs to use their voice and say, in national public forums, we need action on climate, and speak to their elected leaders. If you do a search, and this could be a project for students, look for what CEOs in Fortune 500 companies, or any companies at all, have done that. So the kinds of actions you need to take aren't what you would expect if you're the sustainability director at a corporation. Here's an example. I'm going to give you a couple examples of how to find big leverage and use it. I was in my office one day and I got a call from a group called Forest Ethics. And they said, hey, will you ban Kleenex? I said, okay, maybe. Why? And they said, Kimberly-Clark, which owns Kleenex, is logging endangered forests. They're not putting any post-consumer waste in tissue, and they're bad. We said, okay, we'll join a boycott of 700 other companies and ban Kleenex, whatever. And Aspen is a real kind of tight community with it. You're in a fishbowl. And after we did the ban, I got a call from the press, and they said, hey, you doing anything interesting lately? And I said, yeah, we banned Kleenex. And the next day we got totally annihilated in the paper. We had one headline was "Save the Planet, Eat a Boogie." Another planet was the issue, or headline was the issue with tissues, Kleenex, nothing to sneeze about. We were made fun of for flagrant greenwashing, doing something that really didn't matter, it didn't cost us anything, and claiming to be environmental heroes. And then for hypocrisy, we fly people from Europe, and then they come ski using coal-fired power. Who are we to criticize other businesses? So it was a catastrophe from a PR perspective. And I had to go grovel to the CEO and say, sorry about this, I didn't mean to, embarrass us. About 5 days later, we got a call from a senior vice president of Kimberly-Clark saying, hey, we got a problem. We don't want you boycotting this because Aspen is so well known and so many influential people come there. We want to talk to you. So we ended up in a dialogue with the CEO of Kimberly-Clark. Now, Kimberly-Clark at the time was a $30 billion corporation, bigger than half the countries in the world. And so this is what you call asymmetric warfare in the military. This is a really almost meaningless business, Aspen Skiing Company, exerting hugely disproportionate power against another entity. And after about a year and a half in which we had several CEO-to-CEO conversations, but 700 other people also joined the boycott, Kimberly-Clark changed its forestry practices, which is a huge climate issue. So this is, who would have thought this might be what you should be doing as a director of sustainability? Another example is we were trying to cut our carbon footprint like everyone else, and it kept going up. Why did it keep going up? Well, the utility, which was a rural co-op, and you face all these issues here in Vermont, had just bought a coal plant. So we said, what's the utility? Who runs the utility? Well, it turns out it's a publicly elected board. But no one ever knew about the elections because the utility was like the South in the 40s and 50s suppressing the vote. They didn't announce the election. It was a good old boys club. The same people always ran. They'd been on the board for 30 years. I said, did you ever have a woman on the board? You've never had a woman on the board. And this 87-year-old guy said, yeah, we did. In 1937, there was a woman on the board. And so we ran a woman. And she won because she was a woman. And then we ran other candidates and put modern campaigns, email and social media behind them, and we took over the entire board. So now the utility is one of the most progressive in the United States. But who would have thought that that was where this is the head of the utility. This is the kind of person you deal with when you're, it's metaphorically the head. They look like Tommy Lee Jones. So then we said, how else can we influence the world? Where's our leverage? And this is the question I want you to ask. If you're a teacher, a business person, a student, where's my big lever? And if you're a student, one of your inclinations is, I have no power at all. I'm going to talk about people without power, but think about the high school kids and what they've done in the gun control debate. You have a lot more power than you think. So we said, hey, we'll put the logo for a nonprofit that's trying to weaponize the outdoor industry like the NRA, but on climate. We'll put it on our uniform so that when a billionaire comes by and says, hey, what's that on your uniform? You can talk about climate. And we do that. And we go to Washington, D.C. This picture is full of legendary skiers and climbers in the center there. There's Conrad Anker, who found Mallory's body on Everest. Chris Davenport. Look at that guy's mustache. You can see it. Awesome. And we go to D.C. and walk in the room representing the outdoor industry, which is one of the biggest industries in the world, and it's in red states in particular. So Utah and Montana, we can have political power and win elections because we mobilize this young, enthusiastic, passionate base. And this is what climate solutionism can look like. These people are having fun. This is Ted Deutsch, who started the Bipartisan Climate Solutions Caucus. And there's Angel Collinson again, Hadley Hammer, two professional skiers, having a great time, but the message was serious. We can come in, and we can get votes for you, and we can win elections, and we can support you, and times are changing. So the climate battle doesn't have to be bleak and dismal. The opportunities are huge, and we have the policy tools, and we have the technology on the shelf today to solve the problem. All we're missing is the political will. So have fun, get creative with it. Here's another random idea. We partnered with New Belgium Brewing and Ben & Jerry's and said, hey, people aren't being citizens. They're not calling their congresspeople. So what if you turned consumerism into activism? What if you put a website that links you to your senator's office on a beer bottle so that while you're drinking beer and feeling buzzed and more relaxed, as you do, you read the bottle, and it says, hey, call your senator. Well, people don't know how to call their senator. Here's the phone number. I don't know what to say. Here's what you say. So you've got people who now are empowered by the alcohol, but also by the information, which is call your senator and say, I'm a citizen, or I spend money in your state and I care about climate. They're not hearing it. They're just not hearing it. It's like 19th on the priority list, and that has to change. So I want to end here with some thoughts on how do you engage a problem that's so terrifying and so difficult that it seems overwhelming. The good news is I showed you the slide on the right, but the slide on the left is if we take action. It's still dry, but it's manageable. So we are at a point in history now where we can take action to mitigate the problem in a way that will enable us to live. It's going to be a different world. We've already warmed a degree. We're going to warm another degree. But it doesn't have to be a catastrophe. So we know we can get there. I look for inspiration wherever I can. This is Charles Bukowski, legendary poet. He was a bar fighter and a postman, of all things. Here he is drinking and smoking at the same time, not advised. But he said, what matters most is how well you walk through the fire. And I love that line because here's Ali again, it kind of puts you on a combat footing with climate change. Climate change it's a battle that is almost impossible to fight. We might well lose it. And it's as if someone said, hey, this talk is over. We're going to go have some hors d'oeuvres and hang out. But before that, I'm going to select one of you, bring you on stage, and I have back over here, I've got Muhammad Ali from 1970, and you're going to fight him. That's climate change. You have to take on this impossible battle. You have to take it on every day. So if I said that to you and you came up here, you'd have two options. One would be to say, well, I have a term paper or Excel spreadsheet I'm working on. I can't do that right now. But if I put a gun to your head, which is the situation with climate, you have to fight Ali. You have two options. One is you kind of cover up, and Ali will pummel you into organ failure, will take you to one of these great hospitals around here. But the other option would be to pretend you know how to fight. What do you know? You're not bar fighters, but there are a few things that you probably know. Keep your chin down, right? Because this is a knockout punch. Move around. Try to knock them out. This is the challenge of climate. You got to pretend that we can win this thing. At least you'll have fun. And you might actually win. And I submit to you, this battle, this fight we have on climate is something you want it to hurt. Nothing of any importance has ever been achieved without difficulty. Reinhold Niebuhr, the philosopher, said, nothing of any importance will be achieved in your lifetime. So it'll be difficult and it'll take a while. And you should say, this is discouraging. You should say, that's exactly what we do as people. This is why we like stories like The Lord of the Rings so much, where you fight these impossible battles and you never quite win, but this is what human beings do. Think about it, at the most baseline level, we're mortal. So you're fighting a losing battle against mortality. And all through human existence, we've fought against impossible odds. It's what we do. So we're leaving you here, this whole group of speakers is leaving you saying, hey, you're here to save civilization, not the planet, civilization, because that's what hinges in the balance if we warm the world to 6 or 9 degrees, which is the trajectory we're headed on. And one response from you might be, you got the wrong guy, or you got the wrong woman. You know, I can barely get up in the morning. I get up to pee 4 times a night. I'm not Jackie Robinson or MLK. I'm not a world changer and a leader. But history is replete with examples of people who had no power at all, who drove radical change. This is Mohamed Bouazizi, probably the least powerful person in the world. He was a Tunisian vegetable vendor who was so frustrated with how the police and the government were treating him that he set himself on fire. And he triggered the Arab Spring. We don't know how that's going to play out. But I'm not saying set yourself on fire, but I'm saying you should metaphorically do that. The existentialist philosopher Camus was hanging out in a cafe, drinking coffee and smoking cigarettes as they do. And a journalist saw him and said, I'm going to ask this legendary philosopher one question. And he said, hey, your house is on fire. And you can take one thing for safekeeping, one thing. What would you take? Camus said, I would take the fire. If you had a line like that once in your life, you could retire. What a badass. I want to end with this picture. This is Raphael's painting of the Genesis story of Lot and the burning cities on the plain. You know this story. God said, hey, Lot, this city's gone to hell. I'm going to burn it down. You're my friend. You can get out. And the only thing is, don't look back, because if you do, I'll punish you. And so Lot leaves. His wife looks back and gets turned into a pillar of salt and punishment. And Kurt Vonnegut has this great story about this story. He says, so she turns around and gets punished, gets turned into a pillar of salt. But that's why I love her, because what she did is so human. Think about it. You look back to where you had your first kiss. You look back to where your kids went to first grade, where you met your husband or your wife. Of course you look back. It's the most human thing you could possibly do. And with climate change, you have an opportunity tomorrow, waking up, to engage in the climate battle, and in the process of doing that, endow your life with some of the oldest aspirations that humans have ever had. The idea of living a graceful life, a dignified life, of treating people well with tolerance. You can do that regardless of what your career ends up, because we're all going to be ending up climate warriors starting tomorrow. You're given that opportunity, and given it, you can't, I don't think, help but do it any more than Lot's wife couldn't help but look back. Thank you.
You sure? All right, I'm not really understanding.
That's power right there. Amazing.
So, about 15 minutes.
Okay. Any questions out there for our speakers? Our extraordinary speakers.
Don't be shy. The first person who asks, then everyone has a question. Don't be shy. Don't be afraid to.
We're not going to change the world if we can't ask questions.
Yeah. Hey, I cut my hair myself, by the way, too.
Okay. Yours looks better than mine.
Yes.
Okay, awesome. Mr. Schindler, your talk was so amazing, and I was just really moved by it. My question is, as a college student and a young person, what can we do when we wake up in the morning to start changing? Like, what would you suggest to the average college student how we can begin to change?
The Lieutenant Governor says brush your teeth. That's always a good idea. So you're lucky to be in a place where the school gets it. I went to Bowdoin College, and I've been hammering them saying, why don't you get it? This is an opportunity to bring to attract students, to train people for the real world, which is going to require climate science and policy education. So you're already like most of the way there, which is study hard, take the climate courses. But then I'd say, don't accept what you're doing as adequate. So the question is, hey, you've got a sustainability program at the school, but how do you have even more leverage? You know, at some point you're going to have to say, this is a problem. Climate is a problem that we have to solve in the next decade, actually probably in the next 5 years. So are the actions we're doing on a day-to-day basis adequate to that task? Your president is willing to speak out on this issue, so do more of that. Use your president to leverage other people. Not your president of the United States, president of college. But think about what your big leverage is. And again, think about those high school students who've changed the discussion on gun control. You have enormous power, and some of it might require spending some time with your friends hanging out and thinking where your power is.
Thank you.
And with that, in terms of the president, which then gets me, of course, thinking about politics and titles and things, but in Vermont, we're talking about a carbon pollution tax to transform our transportation system and our consumption system and the economics of fossil fuels. And we're having a hard time getting a study out the door in Vermont. If we can't do it here, where's it going to happen? If you're not picking up the phone and calling your state senators and your legislators, representatives in the governor's office, it's not going to happen. And maybe it's still not going to happen if everybody in this room picks up the phone. But when more and more people do, that eventually does change it. And if there's a state that phone calls can make a difference, I got to tell you, it's in Vermont more than almost any other. Most legislators don't get more than 5 or 10 calls on anything. So I just would say there's another option.
Thank you all for that wonderful, all of the wonderful talks today. It's really been wonderful to hear you. I'm curious if each of you could talk about what you think about the role of how we structure our economy in the fight against climate change. Capitalism requires growth to fuel. And the way our current economy is structured, it requires growth and consumption endlessly. And I'm curious what your thoughts are about how we attack that problem, how we structure a more sustainable economy.
Good question. I'm mindful that the resources that I have to spend come from the old economy, and how do we look at the new economy? We've started to look, and actually not started, we have been working with a group called the Democracy Collaborative for quite a while. Interestingly enough, there was just an article that said one of the founders of the Democracy Collaborative was actually the person who photocopied and helped get the Pentagon Papers out. People didn't know that at the time. But they're looking at how you change the economy in a way that is resourceful, it has winners and losers, but it is a wider number of winners than now. And it's about changing the way money moves through the system. It's the speed by which money is moving through the system. So for example, there's this whole concept of climate, there's this whole notion of disaster capitalism, this notion that people are going to make a lot of money building new walls, rebuilding things. Well, let's look at how that money flows. How do we ensure if we are going to rebuild that A, we're building in the right place, to B, people doing the rebuilding are people who are local that are going to be able to benefit from that. It's tied to anchor-based institutions, so we funded some initial research on how do you take what we call the EDS, MEDS, and now FEDS, the educational institutions, MEDS, right, doctors, hospitals, and FEDS, federal agencies, offices. How do we build institutions that serve those institutions and the money stays local? So that's one way. It's a long-winded answer to a short question.
I have just a piece of that answer. I think a lot about clean energy in my day-to-day life. And one of the answers, I think, to addressing climate is that we've got to completely transform the way we make energy and the way we use energy. And that in itself is going to be a huge challenge. And we've done it reasonably well in terms of electricity. We haven't done it really well, but we've done better than the other sectors, in that we've managed to make energy efficiency an actual thing that you invest in. You can make money helping people use less energy. You can make money helping people create their own energy through distributed generation. So those things seem very helpful to me. I think the next set of challenges are, how do you move people around? I mean, there's a big thinking going on about electric cars, and that's great. But how do you get more people moving with a lot fewer vehicles? Or how do you get people to be living closer together so that they're not in a car all the time? And there's a corollary to how do you heat buildings without using more? So I see a lot of opportunity in thinking about transforming the energy system as a piece of that puzzle. I'm not ready to take on capitalism quite yet, but I think that there are people who see a different kind of economy that's based on those principles.
I don't think capitalism is the problem. I think it's just that we've never practiced capitalism. Capitalism says that chair has value, that business has value, but we can use the atmosphere as an open sewer, even though we can monetize the cost of that. So your point about a carbon tax, we have to make tweaks to capitalism to make it actually function. And the second piece is that it doesn't have to be deprivation. You know, my old boss, Amory Lovin, says, you know, people didn't say, hey, I need you to burn that black rock and create pollution so that I have a hot shower and cold beer. People don't care how we deliver cold beer, as long as it's cold. And we can do that in a myriad of ways that are less high impact. So it can be a society of abundance, just a different one.
Yes,
Oh, it's for everybody? Well, I just learned that Toys R Us is going out of business. That made me happy. I showed you my story, and we started out as simple people making a simple life. And I think that David really hit it on the head when he said that it really comes down to how you live your life and how you simplify your life. And that's a really hard thing to do in today's society in this country. But I think a lot of people in Vermont are trying to do that. And I think we're trying to move back to the land and do the right thing. And there needs to be a movement, the kind of movement that we did have in the 60s that was a little aggressive and angry and really loud. And I'm so glad that in your talk that you brought that up, because we really need that movement. And we need young people to run for public office, because the only way we can really change our world is to do it from the inside out. Because it's the laws that are going to really determine how our world grows. And so we have to get leaders who believe in the things that we believe in. So I encourage all of you to consider at some point in your life running for public office and really being the change that you see.
Public office, interesting idea. So I would say part of it is also cultural. We don't have to deprive ourselves of everything, but we also have to look at thinking about how capitalism, or at least the marketing world of capitalism, has made us think that happiness is brought through things. And you talked a lot about happiness and joy in your activism and in your actions, and many, your humor was fantastic. It's a cultural shift. And cultural shifts don't happen overnight. You mentioned also, when was the last time you saw that kind of anger? And I leaned forward to the president. I said yesterday, when the governor was signing the gun bill, the anger from some individuals was incredibly palpable. And after that, a gentleman who's been very politically active for a long time and much more on the right end of the spectrum than I am, and I crossed paths, and he said, well, you must be happy today. And I said, actually, I'm not happy when people feel like their culture is being destroyed. I'm glad that we have signed the law, but I'm not happy that people feel that their culture is being destroyed. And what we need to do is make it so that there's a cultural shift that is not destroying anybody else's sense of value. But that cultural shift is about how we find happiness. And do we find it through companionship and camaraderie and storytelling around a fire, to go way back to sort of traditional times, but the metaphor? Or do we find it through more and more things, a la plastic stuff from Toys R Us? So to me, that's a big piece of it.
Can I just build on that? That's how you hear me? How many people here have seen the Story of Stuff, the video? Show of hands. Great. So that started with Amy. Amy is a friend of mine, and I'm on her board. She's now the executive director of Greenpeace, but I'm still on the board of the Story of Stuff. And it started with her sitting around talking to us about all this work. I wish we could show people waste. And she started talking about incineration and started talking about all this stuff. We said, my mom's not going to get this. You need to find a better way to explain this. And so she didn't dumb it down, but she talked about a system of production and consumption, and that we're trashing the planet and we're not having fun with all this stuff. And from that has launched a movement around not just stuff, but also about what does it mean to have consumerism? What does it mean about citizen muscle building? And we're not working on that. The question earlier was, what do you do when you get up in the morning? What's the first thing you do? I think it's to figure out what are other people doing, understanding what the other side is, not that there's always another side. So before I put my glasses on, I'm reading the paper to figure out what is trending, but beyond what is trending, being able to spot what the other side is doing, but also thinking systemically. So, I showed earlier a chart of all these different things going on. I know I can't solve all those problems individually, but I contribute my part, and I have confidence that my life is part of a through line of a whole bunch of people that came before me, and a whole bunch of people will come after me, and that I helped the forces of darkness not gain as much for the time I was here. So it's not like, I think it's, when I was younger, I thought I could help save the planet. It's not about saving the planet, it's about working together to improve the lot of everyone, including the planet. So that's my rant and loud.
Good, we have one more question.
So my question was initially for Mr. Young, but several of you touched on at this point. Towards the end of your presentation, you talked about the next big thing is our transportation system. I just wonder if you had any thoughts on what direction you'd like to see it moving towards.
So I think philanthropy has gotten much more, what's the term, woke about equity and intersectionality, the other buzzword, which is more than a buzzword. There are a set of funders and people who are saying we need to do EVs for everyone, or just EVs and autonomous vehicles, and I'm really worried about that because not everyone can afford an EV. And we have a transit system that used to work, and in many places transit systems are being redesigned. Places like Houston have an increase in bus ridership because they redesign the buses to go where people are. And so when I say what is that big challenge for transportation, how do we shift the easy solution we can get in terms of energy conservation by just doing EVs? And in certain areas, that makes sense. But what about in cities where we can't have autonomous vehicles that are electric just driving around aimlessly, burning up energy? Someone was telling me, there's a great argument against EVs out there. I'm not saying no EVs, but how do we build in transit? And I don't even think of transportation as a modality issue, bikes versus walking versus transit. I think of it as access. Is our transportation providing access to the goods, services, and lives that people need to live? Can you get to your doctor? Can you do that with a minimum carbon footprint? Can you do that in a way that is with more people? Those are questions I think we need to challenge. So there's a lot of wonks that are looking at, well, I love streetcars. Not necessarily the way to go. It's not about the modality, it's about the access for the widest number of people in the fairest way. It's hard to tell people that who are driving to work, but I think that's the thing that when you talk about consumption of fuel, that's what we're starting to do.
No, I think you mostly covered it. I think it's been really interesting because I do work around a lot of those people that really think all you got to do is build more electric cars and everything's settled. And there's a growing conversation in that world about, wait a minute, it isn't just about electric cars. It's not even just about electric buses, which of course is also really important. I mean, it is important to clean up. I think cars and buses are going to be with us. But it's also, to your point about access, it's thinking about the people who need it the most, the people who are in low-income communities and in really heavily polluted communities that are always left behind by these great newfangled wonderful technologies. And thinking about communities, one of the most hopeful things that I've been seeing recently is that a lot of groups that are working on electric vehicles are now going right to those communities and saying, what do you need? What actually do you need from the transportation system? And I think that's a much more productive conversation than just, oh, there's this great new car that's going to come out next year. So.
think that's all we have time for, but this conversation is going to continue in the Gorge right away, so we can, those of you who don't know where the Gorge is, it's in the lower level of the Student Center with the hall. A big, big thank you for our speakers.
I've got one request of the students here, which is that the most important part of this event is about to happen. And will you not be shy and realize that this is just a bunch of awkward nerds too. And if you please would come up to whoever you want here and talk to them, they would be more than happy to talk to you, because otherwise they'll be standing around awkwardly.
Great, yeah, great way to end it. And yes, please, everybody come to the Gorge. If you don't know how to get there, just follow the crowd. We'll be there shortly. Thank you.